Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Imagine you're sitting at your desk at work and you start to hear a wee noise, a low humming sound. As the sound gets louder, you frantically look around to see where it's coming from, but none of your colleagues can hear it and the sound just keeps getting louder. It's painful now and almost pulls you to your knees. It's only then you realise that the sound is coming from your own head. Now imagine that it's not a medical problem and you're not losing your mind. Now imagine that in fact this was a deliberate act by an unknown assailant and you were specifically targeted for reasons only they know. They can reach you from anywhere, unseen and undetected. What is Havana Syndrome? Let's find out. The public initially became aware of something called Havana Syndrome when a small group of US diplomats and intelligence officers were stationed at the US Embassy in Havana, Cuba, first started reporting a strange illness, the symptoms of which were intense head pressure, extreme ear pain, dizziness, cognitive difficulties, a perceived loud buzzing noise, and trouble with vision. The strange thing in this instance was the fact that those affected at this time reported that the symptoms would simply go away once they moved into another room or away from a certain area of the building. This localised incident was swiftly swept under that huge thick rug that most things get swept under. They were simply told that what they were experiencing was psychosomatic or illness due to an infection and even exposure to some form of pesticide. That was until more cases were being reported in various countries like China, Serbia, and Colombia, to name a few. There have even been more recent cases in the United States. One glaring similarity with all of these cases is that whatever it is, it seems to be targeting members of the United States intelligence community and government employees. One such employee that was affected back in the beginning in Cuba in 2016 said that although his symptoms seemed to go away once he left work at the embassy, they soon returned in a bizarre occurrence when he was back at home. And it didn't just affect him, but his family and other families of government employees stationed in Cuba. It would often happen in the middle of the night. He went on to say that he was awoken because all of the dogs in the neighbourhood were all barking at once, which certainly was a strange event. He then said that a strange and powerful noise filled the room and he said it felt like his head was being crushed. The pain was unbearable and he eventually started blacking out. This event forced him to retire at 37 years old. He was having lasting issues maintaining his balance and is now blind in one eye as a result. This employee was able to get an audio recording of the sound that was being heard. It was reported that over 24 officials in Cuba reported similar strange events which the FBI initially deemed as nothing more than mass hysteria. In April of 2018, Miles Taylor was the Deputy Chief of Staff, and he would later go on to be the Chief of Staff for the Trump administration's Department of Homeland Security. He had an essential role within the government, overseeing approximately 25,000 personnel, ranging from border security, aviation, and also cybersecurity. At the time of his attack, he was living in a row house on Capitol Hill when he was awoken around 3:30 AM by a strange sound. A sound that he described as being a chirping type noise, like a cricket. He said it felt or sounded like a digital artificial sound and it was ringing in his ears. He got up and opened his window for some fresh air and noticed as he did so that there was a white panel van parked in his street. The very moment that he noticed the van, its brake lights pinged off and the van sped away. Taylor said this feeling went away after 10 minutes or so, leaving him feeling disorientated and feeling off. A feeling he said continued onto the next day, so much so in fact that he really didn't feel like going to work. He said the sensation afterwards was similar to a mild concussion, like that you would get after suffering a knock on the head playing a sport. Then, about 5 weeks later, it happened again. He was on his way to Andrews Air Force Base. He was set to travel to Israel on a congressional delegation where he would be meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister and other high-ranking officials to discuss sensitive cyber-security issues. On approach to the aircraft, he began to experience the same symptoms that he felt 5 weeks prior. Taylor said that he became more concerned after learning that this was not an isolated incident and, in fact, had affected various high-ranking government officials in the comfort of their own homes. He began to realise that this was a serious threat to national security. During an interview, Taylor stated that a very senior member of the cabinet fell victim to these attacks. Again, he was home at the time. This in itself was enough to assume that these attacks were more than just sheer coincidence. Mr. Taylor was unable to name the individual in question out of respect for the man's high position and privacy. Olivia Troy worked for Homeland Security as a counter-terrorism advisor to Vice President Mike Pence and covered domestic emerging threats, which basically means that she dealt with everything from mass shootings to natural disasters. In 2019, she was leaving her office, which was at the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, which is basically right next to the West Wing of the White House. She was walking down the stairs towards the White House when she felt a sensation that she says felt like she was physically struck in the head. She said it was an intense piercing sensation on the right side of her head, and she instantly felt disorientated and suffered instant vertigo and nausea. She was able to grab hold of the railing to prevent herself from falling. Of course, naturally, the poor lassie started thinking it could be something like a brain tumour or a stroke. I mean, we'd all be the same, right? I know for me, I'd be like, oh aye, this is the end. She left the stairs outside the office building and walked down the side of the West Wing, where she passed through the Secret Service gate and crossed into the staff car park into an area known as the Ellipse. Bearing in mind, up until this point, she was within the high security perimeter of the White House. It wasn't until almost 1 year later that it would happen again. More than once actually for Olivia. And yet again, she was walking to her car in the Ellipse. This time, she said the sensation was so extreme that it made her feel like she was unable to walk. She felt an intense feeling of vertigo and her depth perception was a wee bit wonky, and she felt like she could fall at any moment. Olivia at first didn't want to report these episodes, as it could well have been detrimental to her career, and she would have been at risk of getting her security clearance revoked, something that she had worked so hard to attain. More recent similar attacks were reported by US officials on a trip to Vienna and in India during a visit by the director of the CIA. In 2019, when President Trump was visiting London, 2 members of the national security staff became ill under similar circumstances in a hotel there. The hotel in which they were staying was completely booked out by the White House and government agents. As such, security in and around the hotel was very high. One source stated that this proved damning evidence that something or someone was deliberately either targeting or testing out some method of unseen attack. A few months later, one of the staff members that was affected whilst in London reported that she felt the effects yet again when out walking her dog back in Washington. There have been several accounts of those people affected that have reported after a short time the symptoms re-emerging again. Robin Garfield, a commerce official, was attacked whilst in China with his wife and 2 children. His daughter also suffered the attacks to the point where she was continually falling down. The family were immediately evacuated and taken straight to a State Department treatment program at the University of Pennsylvania. A short time later, Garfield was hit again during the family's treatment in Philadelphia. This caused them to check into a nearby hotel when they were collectively woken up in the early hours of the morning by what was described as overwhelming vibrations in their bodies, and he and his wife quickly tended to the children in the next room. When they opened the door, they were greeted by a strange yet frightening sight. Both of the young children appeared to still be fast asleep, but were thrashing in their beds. As Garfield clutched his daughter, his head was next to hers, and he reports to have heard a very strange sound from within her head that he described as intense rushing water or white noise. He scooped up the young girl and took her into the bed next to his wife and returned for his son. Curiosity would get the better of him, and before picking up his son, he quietly listened at the side of the boy's head and was alarmed to hear the exact same noise. Garfield reported all of these events to the FBI. Today, his family are posted abroad and they continue various treatments in order to improve their balance, eyesight and memory. The US State Department declared that the health problems were either the result of an attack or due to exposure to an unknown device. they declared that it was not blaming the Cuban government and would not say who was to blame. The next month, the US State Department said that it was removing non-essential staff from the US Embassy and warned US citizens not to travel to Cuba. In October 2017, President Donald Trump said he believed that Cuba was responsible for these occurrences, calling them a very unusual attack. In January 2018, the Associated Press reported that a non-public FBI report found no evidence of an intentional sonic attack. A November 2018 report in the New Yorker found that the FBI's investigation into the incidents was stymied by conflict with the CIA and the State Department. The CIA was reluctant to reveal, even to other US government agencies, the identities of affected officers. This was because they were concerned about possible leaks. Federal rules on the privacy of employee medical records also hindered this investigation. In March of 2018, MRI scans and other tests taken by a chief neurologist in Pittsburgh on unspecified number of Canadian diplomats showed evidence of brain damage that mirrored the injuries some of their American counterparts had faced. Also in 2018, Global Affairs Canada ended family postings to Cuba and withdrew all staff with families. Several of the Canadians who were affected in 2017 were reported to still be unable to resume their work due to the severity of their ailments. The lack of knowledge of the cause of Havana Syndrome as of February 2019 had made it challenging for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to investigate this. Funnily enough, the CIA have released an official statement saying that they do not believe this mysterious Havana Syndrome to be the work of a foreign adversary. Let's take a wee look at some of the theories as to what could be causing this. When I first read about Havana Syndrome, one thing sprung to my mind straight away that I was surprised wasn't being mentioned more often as a possibility. A sonic weapon, like one of those cannons that get used during crowd control.
Oh, why is this happening? I can taste my thoughts!
Another theory was pesticides or dangerous chemicals in the air, or a rare species of cicada or cricket, or, as some government agencies decided to land on, nothing more than simple mass hysteria. In December 2020, a study by an expert committee of top scientists in various fields commissioned by the State Department released its report concluding, overall directed pulsed RF energy appears to be the most plausible mechanism in explaining these cases among those that the committee considered, but that each possible cause remains speculative, and that the report should not be viewed as conclusive. One of these doctors, Dr. David Relman, who is a professor of medicine at Stanford University, reported to have discovered clear evidence of an injury to the auditory and vestibular system of the brain. Everything starting with the inner ear. Humans perceive sound and sense balance and translate those perceptions into brain electrical signals. Everybody knows that. He stated that of those affected by Havana Syndrome, a subset of those cases suffered from what he called an acute sensory event, an experience that consisted of the abrupt onset of intense pressure with immense vibrations within the face and head. This would sometimes be accompanied by the sudden onset of sound. He would go on to say that the fact that the attacks were directed at an individual or individuals in such a manner and that the symptoms would dissipate when they left the line of fire and would come back when they returned is something we've never seen or heard of before. Dr. Relman and his team concluded that the way in which it was delivered was likely to be some form of pulsed electromagnetic energy. On the 1st of February 2022, a declassified US intelligence report called Pulsed Electromagnetic Energy and Ultrasound Plausible Causes and said that concealable devices exist that could produce the observed symptoms. So basically, they are saying that these weapons do exist and are easily hidden. It stands to reason that as humans evolve, our technology evolves with us. I'll be honest folks, I think it's definitely dodgy. And I do think it was some kind of field test, whether it was by an agency that was foreign or domestic. But whilst I'm being honest about stuff, I believe there are weapon concepts that exist that are far more dangerous and more remote than we might think. Anyway, if you're still here, you're looking at my face and listening to me waffle on, go ahead, get a nice wee cup of tea because you deserve it. Stay safe out there folks, and remember, keep smiling.